For the last year or so, I've been trying to revamp my complete Living Dex in Pokemon Home by catching every Pokemon, including gender differences, regional variants, and other form changes. I've been doing this by catching every Pokemon in their original generation while using Pokeballs only. If you want to complete a full Living Dex the same way I am, or if you just want to keep track of every Pokemon you can catch, I have a full Living Dex guide you can download in the description of these videos. There are two versions, a full resolution version that can be opened in Microsoft Excel, and a lower resolution version that can be opened in Google Sheets. This guide is a great way to keep track of every Pokemon that can be caught in each generation, along with showing the oldest games each Pokemon can be obtained from, while going in depth on how some of the event Pokemon and other obscure Pokemon can be obtained, along with watching the series, of course. But with all that being said, it's time to continue our Living Dex journey with Generation 6. I've been completing this Living Dex in generation order, so if you're new to my channel or just new to these videos, I'd highly recommend watching the series from the beginning as I explain more in depth as to why I'm doing this challenge, along with the general rules I'm trying to follow. I will leave a card for that video on screen now. Alright, now that you've probably gotten all caught up with the series, it's time to dive into what is probably the most unique generation out of them all, with tons of wacky Pokemon and new mechanics that will need to be explained as to how I'm going about obtaining them all. But let's start with Sylveon. In the Generation 1 Living Dex challenge, I decided to catch every extra Pokemon I needed for future evolutions. While in the Generation 2 Living Dex and onward, I decided it would make more sense to go back and revisit older generations to get the newer evolutions. So I already have caught an Eevee from Generation 1 in order to evolve into Sylveon, along with 2 additional Pokemon that will be used for Generations 8 and 9. After that, there's all the Mythicals and Event Vivillon. In past generations, there have been ways to obtain the old event Pokemon, like using specific glitches or the DNS exploit in order to unlock the past events from so many years ago. Unfortunately, in Generation 6 and onward, none of those methods exist, as of now, as far as I'm aware, without the use of external hardware or software. So moving forward, I will simply count all of the event Pokemon I already had for my Living Dex and explain how I got each one. Starting with this event Fancy Pattern Vivillon. It's actually pretty funny, when I originally bought my Y copy, it was a used copy and the save file had already been played through. When I loaded up the save file, there was a delivery man in the Pokemon Center. I got really excited thinking, oh, maybe this could be like a shiny or a mythical or something crazy, and when I claimed it, it ended up being this Fancy Pattern Vivillon, which I was really disappointed with initially, because to me it just seemed like a regular old Pokemon that you could just catch in game. In hindsight though, it's actually really special, as this event Vivillon has never been re-released outside of being able to catch it in Scarlet and Violet. And yes, I am fully aware that you can just catch this Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet, but in my opinion, the number one priority for my Pokemon in this Living Dex is if they are caught in the original generation they were obtained in. So this Generation 6 Fancy Pattern Vivillon to me is a little more special than, say, a Fancy Pattern Vivillon I catch in Scarlet and Violet, even though if I catch a Fancy Pattern Vivillon in Scarlet and Violet, it will have my OT and ID and also be caught in a Pokeball. Still, I think it's a lot cooler to have the original event one. Next up, we have the Pokeball Pattern Vivillon. Now this one was also only released once in the original games via an event, but unlike the Fancy Pattern Vivillon, this one has never been made available to catch in any other game. In fact, I actually missed out on this event entirely, and after a while of searching the internet high and low, I ended up finding a subreddit where people trade Vivillons with each other, and I ended up finding someone who had extra Pokeball Vivillons that they were willing to trade me. That's how I got this one, despite missing the event after all those years. Next up is Diancie, another event that I originally missed out on because I wasn't really playing Pokemon when these events were available. I got back into the series at the tail end of Generation 6, so a lot of those older events they did at the beginning of the generation, I just missed out on. But luckily, in my local Discord that I use for Pokemon Go, we ended up having a conversation about the original color Magearna and how you needed to obtain every single Pokemon, including the Mythicals, in order to get it, which I didn't have all the Mythicals, I was missing Diancie, and a local chimed in saying that they had actually gotten a bunch of codes for Diancie and claimed all of them, and just had a bunch of extra Diancies left over, and they were willing to trade me one. So I actually got really lucky with this one. Next up, we have Hoopa. Now, I actually was able to get 2 Hoopas because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they originally had an event for Hoopa that I did miss out on, but then a little while later, they did a re-release of an event where you could just put a code in online and get the Hoopa, and I was able to get 2 Hoopas, one in my Pokemon Y copy and another in my Alpha Sapphire copy. So I was able to get 2, and I can change one of the forms into the Unbound Hoopa, which I will explain later in this video. Unfortunately, the other Hoopa says it's obtained in the Hoenn region, but in my opinion, I'm not really super picky on what region the Pokemon was first met in. All I care about is that it was obtained in the original generation it was first available in. So even though that Hoopa says it was caught in Hoenn, it's still a Generation 6 Hoopa, and it still counts for this challenge. And same goes for this Volcanion. As you can see, this Volcanion says it was first encountered in the Hoenn region, but again, it's still a Generation 6 Volcanion from the original event. This was a GameStop code that you could get from a card if you went to GameStop. I ended up getting a few of them, and I think I gave away the rest of them because this is my only Volcanion I have, and I remember getting at least 2 of them. That is all of the event Pokemon that you technically can no longer get right now, especially from Generation 6. So we just had to explain how I got these, and this was probably what we're going to be doing for the rest of the generations with all the mythicals, as those are kind of in a similar boat where you can't really obtain them anymore without some sort of third-party software or hardware. So moving on, now that we got all that out of the way, it's time to start catching every single Pokemon from Kalos. Before we start, however, if you made it this far into the video, please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. Both are completely free and they help me out a ton. I also have 3 more generations to go through, so you won't want to miss those. Okay, I actually lied about catching all of the Gen 6 Pokemon right now. To start, we actually have to go back and evolve my Vanillish into Vanillux. I got a few comments on the Generation 5 video saying I forgot to evolve Vanillish into Vanillux, and originally I just thought that I forgot to include the recording, but looking back, I totally forgot to evolve Vanillish into Vanillux, so here I'm doing that, and we have officially completed Gen 5 now. So to start Generation 6, I need to tackle all of the Vivillon patterns. Now, Vivillon is a very unique Pokemon where it has different patterns based on what region you're in, and it's based on the region you set your 3DS to. And unfortunately, the 3DS is region locked, so there's only so many areas you can actually set your 3DS to, and you physically cannot get every single Vivillon on one 3DS. You have to have multiple 3DSs that are from different regions in order to get all the Vivillons. But what I did is I started by going one at a time with each Vivillon pattern that my personal 3DS can just get on its own. So the first Vivillon pattern I wanted to go for was Continental. So I set my region to Argentina, and I set it to Rio Negro, which is an area that you can get Continental Vivillon at. I do have a map that I will show on screen now. This is an image that you can find online if you just search Vivillon map, and it'll show you roughly every area that gets every pattern of Vivillon. So I just looked at that map, and then I looked at real maps to see what lined up in order to get each and every Vivillon pattern. Some countries have multiple patterns in them, so I wanted to make sure I was in the right area, and for this, Rio Negro is where you can get Continental in Argentina. There are more locations for a lot of these areas, but it really doesn't matter as long as you're within the right area for whatever Vivillon pattern you're going for. Also, I should note, while I was doing this, I originally thought that you needed to format your 3DS, and then when you set up your 3DS, choose your region in order to do that. Apparently, you don't have to do that. Apparently, you can just change your region in the system settings. But even though you don't have to restart your 3DS every time you want to do this, you do have to restart your save file. This is because if you have an already existing save file for X and Y and you change your region on your 3DS, it will not update whatever scatterbugs you get. So you will have to restart your save file with the new location in order to get the new scatterbugs. So I restarted my save file, I picked my first Chespin, and then I went and caught 3 Continental Scatterbugs. Now the reason I caught 3, and this is going to be quite the explanation, is that Scatterbug and Spupa, even though they don't have the same patterns as Vivillon, they do have the internal data, the internal forms of those patterns of Vivillon. So even though you can't see them, they do technically all have separate forms. For example, I've been referring to them as Continental Scatterbugs. It's because they are Continental form Scatterbugs. They aren't just a set Scatterbug and then eventually they evolve into a different form Vivillon. Now, the thing about this that's really unique is that These aren't really required forms for a Living Dex. They are what I consider to be optional forms because they don't show up in Pokemon Home. Pokemon Home doesn't register them as different forms of Scatterbug, but they are actually different forms of Scatterbug and Spupa. I actually do have these listed on my full Living Dex guide in Generation 6. Anything that's highlighted in that light blue color is essentially an optional form that you don't need. But for someone like me who's crazy, and maybe someone like you if you're into that and wants to have everything fully completed, 150% complete full Living Dex, then you would probably want to go for these optional forms. But again, they are not required. This is just something I want to do. I want to get every form of Scatterbug and Spupa and Vivillon, even though Home only recognizes the Vivillon as the different forms. After catching the 3 continental Scatterbugs, I then set my 3DS to the United States and sent it to the state of Ohio because this is where you can get the modern Vivillon. After restarting my X file again, I picked my second Chespin and then caught 3 modern Scatterbugs. For Marine Vivillon, I set my region to Chile, and I set it to, and I'm totally going to butcher this name, Antofagasta. Then I picked my third and final Chespin and caught 3 Marine Scatterbug. For the Archipelago Vivillon, I set my region to the Dominican Republic, and for this one, you don't have to really have a specific region because all of Dominican Republic is Archipelago Vivillon. I picked my first Fennekin, and then I caught 3 Archipelago Scatterbug. For High Plains Vivillon, I set my region to the United States, and I set it to the state of California, picked my second Fennekin, and then caught 3 High Plains Scatterbug. For Savannah Vivillon, I set my region to Brazil, and I set it to Rio de Janeiro. I picked my first Froakie, and then I caught 3 Savannah Scatterbug. Which also, I should mention, I totally forgot that Pokemon have a 100% catch rate on Route 2 in this game, so I figured that out later on, but you see me attacking these Scatterbugs when I really don't have to do that. For Sun Pattern Vivillon, I set my region to Guatemala, and just like Dominican Republic, all of Guatemala is the Sun Vivillon, so you don't really have to look up where precisely you need to be. I chose my second Froakie, and then I caught 3 Sun Scatterbug. For Ocean Pattern, I set my region to the United States and set it to the state of Hawaii, and I caught 3 Ocean Scatterbugs. For Jungle Vivillon, I set my region to Panama, and just like Guatemala, you don't have to really choose where you are precisely, as all of Panama is Jungle Vivillon. I then caught 3 Jungle Scatterbugs. And then lastly, which I did this last, but I had no idea you could do this, for a North American 3DS, you can actually set your region to Saudi Arabia, which is kind of crazy, and I was able to catch 3 Sandstorm Scatterbug. And that is all the Vivillons I need to get on my 3DSs. I will come back later for the other ones, but first I needed to start my actual playthroughs of X and Y, so I started with Y. I chose Fennekin, and in my region, I was able to get the Polar Scatterbugs. After playing through a little bit, my Fennekin evolved into Braixen. I was able to get the Jaw Fossil from this scientist, and restore it into a Tyrunt. After playing through a little more, my Braixen evolved into Delphox, and my Tyrunt evolved into Tyrantrum. Then near the end of the game, I was able to encounter Yveltal, which Xerneas and Yveltal both have raised catch rates, so it was very easy to catch Yveltal here. Then I went through Terminus Cave and found Zygarde, which I do need 2 Zygardes. There's a lot of confusion around Zygarde and its different forms, but for this, we only need 2 of them, and Zygarde's catch rate is not increased, so it took us a little longer to catch Zygarde, but nothing too bad, nothing crazy difficult like Uxie was. After catching Zygarde and completing the save file, I was able to start getting the rest of the Vivillons. In order to do this, I needed the help from a longtime viewer, Echo. Echo has been very active in my Twitch chat for a very long time, and a while back, they had mentioned that they were getting all of the 3DSs that you needed to get all the Vivillon patterns in order to shiny hunt all of them. I thought it was a really cool idea, and unfortunately, as soon as they got all of the 3DSs and cartridges they needed in order to shiny hunt all the Vivillon, they had just announced that you were able to do all of this in Scarlet and Violet via the Pokemon Go postcards. Now, even though it's a bummer they went through all that time and effort to get all those 3DSs and all those cartridges in order to shiny hunt all the Vivillon, only to be told later on that you can just do that in any Scarlet and Violet save file, they were still determined to Masuda method for all of the different Vivillon patterns in their X and Y file, which I still think it's really cool because it's not every day that you're able to just get every single pattern of Vivillon in X and Y. But while they were breeding for the different Scatterbugs, I had to ask them if they were okay trading me some eggs of every single Scatterbug I needed in order for me to complete my Living Dex. They agreed to it, and in order for this to work, all they had to do was breed a scatterbug in a Pokeball, trade me the egg, and then I would hatch the egg into the scatterbug. As when you hatch the Pokemon, the OT and ID is based on whoever hatches the egg, not whoever receives the egg. So they were able to trade me eggs of all of the different scatterbugs, Spupas, and Vivians I needed, including the Tundra pattern, the Garden pattern, the Elegant pattern, the Meadow pattern, the River pattern, the Monsoon pattern, and the Icy Snow pattern. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you actually can get the Icy Snow pattern from a North American 3DS, but there was some shenanigans with Pokemon Home back in the day where the Icy Snow Scatterbug had a different home sprite than the rest of them, and I wanted to test that out, but before I was able to, they actually ended up patching that out. So even though I probably could have gotten the Icy Snow pattern Scatterbug myself, Echo was kind enough to trade me 3 eggs of the Icy Snow Scatterbug, along with, obviously, the rest of the Scatterbugs I needed. After receiving all of the eggs from Echo, I hatched every single Scatterbug, and then I had to evolve every single Scatterbug into Spupa and then Vivian. I actually had to do this twice because I had to make sure every Scatterbug and Spupa would evolve into the correct Vivian pattern, so I knew exactly which forms I had of each Scatterbug. I then marked every form to match them with the Vivian patterns in order to make sure I always know exactly what form every Scatterbug and every Spupa is. So here's me evolving every Spupa into Vivian. First we got the Polar pattern, then the Icy Snow pattern, Elegant pattern, Continental pattern, Garden pattern, Tundra pattern, Meadow pattern, Modern pattern, Marine pattern, Archipelago pattern, High Plains pattern, Sandstorm pattern, River pattern, Savannah pattern, Monsoon pattern, Sun pattern, Ocean pattern, and Jungle pattern. Now, Echo also sent me a link to every single Vivian pattern you can get based on what region your 3DS is from, so I will leave that in the description. And also, absolutely massive shout out to Echo. I am so happy they let me do this. They helped me out with this. I never thought I'd be able to get every single Vivian pattern from their original games with my OT caught in Pokeballs only. I never thought I'd be able to actually complete this, so I am in your debt, Echo. Huge shout out to them. I'll also leave a link to their Twitter account in the description of this video, so please follow them there. They were a big help to me on this challenge. So moving on from Vivian, remember how I said I had to get 3 of each Scatterbug in order to get the different patterns of Scatterbug, Spupa, and Vivian? As Scatterbug and Spupa, they share the same forms as Vivian despite being not visible. They do store those forms internally and they are optional Pokemon. Well, it turns out the same thing actually applies to Mothim. I had someone in my chat tell me that Mothim shares the same form change that is kind of a hidden form and not necessarily a required form for a Living Dex, but still an alternate form for this Pokemon. And I was unaware of this, but it's essentially the reverse of Scatterbug. So Scatterbug stores the form so it knows what Vivian to turn into, but Mothim's different. Mothim just saves the form of what Burmy it evolved from. So I actually went back into my Platinum copy in order to get the different forms of Mothim, because I didn't know these things even existed. And unfortunately, in my Gen 4 Living Dex video, I don't know what cloak the Mothim that I got for my Living Dex was, so I had to go back and catch 3 Burmies as opposed to just 2, because there was a solid chance that the Burmy that I evolved into Mothim changed forms, and I just don't have the footage for it anymore. And when I showed the evolution for Mothim, I didn't show what cloak the Burmy was. So I had to catch 3 extra male Burmies from the honey trees in Platinum, change all of their forms into the respective cloaks, and then evolve each cloak into the different Mothim, and then put each Mothim into Pokemon Home. Again, this is a completely optional form. You don't have to do this, only for the real crazy people like me that want to have like a 150% complete Living Dex. But I did update my Living Dex guide in the description that you can download to include the different forms of Mothim. After the absurd amount of moth shenanigans we had to deal with, I then started my X save file for the final time, and I chose Froakie as my starter. After a little bit of playing through the game, my Froakie evolved into Frogadier. Then I grabbed the Sail fossil from this scientist instead of the Jaw fossil, quickly restored it into an Amora, and then my Frogadier evolved into Greninja. Shortly after, my Amora evolved into an Aurorus, And then I was able to take on Xerneas, and just like Yveltal, Xerneas has a really high catch rate and was very easy to catch. At this point, my X file had been played through all the way, so I went to catch my second Zygarde. Also, if you're wondering why there's a face cam and a counter on screen now, it's because I live streamed most of the catching live on Twitch and also YouTube. I now simulcast on Twitch and YouTube, so make sure you follow me on Twitch, links is in the description of all my videos, and if you want to just see me live on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. After catching Zygarde, I went to the route south of Santaloon City and caught myself a Bunnelby. Then I went to the route north of Santaloon City to start getting some of the Flabebe, which, again, I should always stress this in every single video I make of this. Not only do we jump around every which way, just trying to catch every Pokemon we need, and we're all over the place, but I also don't know all of the route names by heart, so a lot of times I just described them based on directions. So, route to the north of Santaloon City. So we went into the yellow flowers in order to get the yellow Flabebe, which we need 3 of each flower Flabebe. There are 5 flowers in total, and we need 3 of each for the entire line. So starting with the yellow flower. After we caught all 3 yellow flowers, we went to the red flowers and found our red flower Flabebe. Then on the route with the daycare, I wanted to get the blue flower Flabebe, so I went in the purple flowers, but instead I found a Swirlix, and at this point I realized I never changed my version of game that I was using, so I was on X version, so I was like, wait, I should catch all of the X exclusives, and Swirlix is one of the X exclusives. So after catching the 2 Swirlix for the line, I went to Route 8 and fished with the Good Rod in order to get Clauncher, and then right after that, I used the Super Rod in order to get Clawitzer. Then returning to my Y version, I went back to the purple flowers and found an orange flower Flabebe, which this is a 4% encounter in any of the flowers Flabebe can appear in, so we got that one pretty quickly. And then I found Spritzy, which is the version exclusive to Y, so we caught 2 Spritzy for the line. Then I found the blue flower Flabebe. After catching all of the Flabebes, I needed 3 more, which are the white flower Flabebe, and those, just like the orange flower, can be found in any of the flowers that the Flabebes appear in, but the white flower is a 1% encounter rate, so it's significantly more rare. I did use a level 14 repel trick in order to boost it up to a 1.78% encounter rate, which sounds very insignificant, but it's actually quite a bit of difference when the odds are 1 in 100 versus roughly like 1 in 60, 70. So not like the craziest difference, but it does make a huge difference when you have a repel trick going like that. Unfortunately, it still took us a very long time to find all 3 Flabebes of the white flower variety. Now, I will say, before you comment, you can breed for the different color Flabebes based on whatever the parent is. So if I breed a white flower Flabebe with a Ditto, I will only be getting white flower Flabebes. I, however, didn't want to do this because I've been doing this challenge for 6 generations now, and I still have not found a shiny. So I wanted to encounter all of the low encounter rate Pokemon just in hopes of finding a random shiny during this challenge. I did not find a shiny. In fact, I actually found Pokerus while hunting for this Flabebe and no shiny, so it's kind of crazy I haven't found a shiny in this entire challenge yet across all these generations, but I found Pokerus, which in the older games is 3 times as rare as finding a shiny, and in the newer games is 6 times as rare as finding a shiny. So if you notice throughout this video, some of my Pokemon have Pokerus, it's, yeah, because we found Pokerus randomly while hunting for the white flower Flabebe. After finally catching all 3 of the white flower Flabebes, I decided to tackle the different sizes of Pumpkaboos, as the super-sized Pumpkaboo is also a 1% encounter rate. But before we did that, we found a Phantump. I also want to mention that in the last video, I got a few comments suggesting that I give my Smeargle Soak as its 4th move. This was actually really helpful because not only does Soak allow me to use False Swipe on the ghost types, but starting in Generation 6, you can no longer use Spore on grass types. So Soak, which changes their type to water, allows me to use Spore on these grass ghost type Pokemon. And on top of that, it allows me to use False Swipe more effectively on Pokemon that normally resist normal type moves. So thanks for the suggestion. After the Phantump, I found my first average size Pumpkaboo. Now, Pumpkaboo has 4 different sizes, so you need 8 total for the full line, 4 for Pumpkaboo and 4 for Gourgeist. The average size is the most common, so we found those ones rather quickly. While looking for Pumpkaboo, I found a Klefki, and then shortly after, I found a small size Pumpkaboo. After catching the small size Pumpkaboo, I noticed it was level 36, and I was able to use it to do a level 36 Propel trick to make the super size over 3 times as likely to appear, along with making the large size a lot more common as well. So I quickly found 2 large size Pumpkaboos, and then shortly after, I actually ended up finding back-to-back super size Pumpkaboos. And a lot of people were suggesting that I use the ability Frisk in order to tell that the Pumpkaboo is supersized, because apparently all of the supersized Pumpkaboo hold items. But if you just have sounds on, the supersized Pumpkaboo has a different call than the other Pumpkaboos. Take a listen. After catching all the Pumpkaboos, I went to the forest south of Snowbell City in order to get a Trevenant. Then I decided to breed my Tyrantrum and my Amora with a Ditto in order to get eggs for Amora and Tyrunt. While hatching the eggs though, I need to catch more Pokemon, so I went to Route 5 in order to get Skiddo. We need 2 of those for the line. And then we got Furfrou. Now Furfrou, I've mentioned a few times on my channel, is in a pretty sad state when it comes to the different forms it has. Furfrou has 10 forms, and you can change its form by giving it a haircut. But unfortunately in Generation 6, as soon as you put it in the PC, it reverts to the natural form. In Generation 7, they actually fixed this and made it so that when you put it in the PC, it retains its form. But as soon as you put it into Pokemon Bank, it will also revert to its natural form again. Meaning there's no way to get all of the different forms of Furfrou in Pokemon Home, as they need to pass through Pokemon Bank in order to send up into Home, unless you use Pokemon Go. But unfortunately, Pokemon Go, the different forms of Furfrou for the most part are regionals. So you either have to trade people from different parts of the world, travel the world, or trade spoofers in Pokemon Go, or spoof yourself in Pokemon Go in order to get all of the Furfrou forms in Pokemon Home. This would easily be fixed if they just included Furfrou in a mainline game on the Switch, because obviously Home doesn't revert the form change of Furfrou, clearly as seen from Pokemon Go. But Furfrou is one of the few remaining Pokemon that is still not on a mainline Switch title. That is until Pokemon Legends ZA comes out. Once Pokemon Legends ZA comes out, Furfrou will without a doubt be in that game, as it was shown off in the trailer, and then finally we will be able to change our forms of Furfrou for our home Living Dexes. But for now, I don't really want to wait for that. I just caught myself 10 different Furfrous that are all just gonna be the natural form in my home until Legends ZA comes out. And if you want to be really technical and you have an issue with me only having the natural forms of Furfrou, I do also have the other forms of Furfrou from Pokemon Go that I traded on the GTS for or got myself. So here are all those forms of Furfrou, just in case somehow we are never able to change Furfrou's forms in Home from the mainline games. I still at least have these ones from Go. After catching the 10 Furfrous, I got myself a Pancham, which I need 2 of these for the line. I then went to Route 22 to catch Litleo. I do need 3 of these as Pyroar has a gender difference, but unfortunately the gender ratio for male Litleo is 1 in 8, so it actually kind of took me a while to find a male Litleo, and I was just too stubborn to use Cute Charm to make it a little more common. Guys, I'm just desperate to find a shiny in this challenge, like come on. Also on the same route, but in the yellow flowers that you need Waterfall to get to, we were able to find a Diggersby to complete the Bunnelby line, and then my Amora and Tyrunt eggs hatched. I then went to Santaloon Forest to catch 3 Fletchlings for the line, which I was kind of shocked that you can't catch Fletchinder in the wild at all, so we needed to just catch 3 Fletchlings. I believe you can catch Fletchinder in the Friend Safari, but I did not have the right Friend Safari for it. I then went to Route 6 to catch Esper and Honedge. Esper, I need 3 of them because Meowstic has a gender difference, which Meowstic is one of the few gender difference Pokemon that is actually considered an alternate form. Normally, gender differences are purely visual, but for Meowstic, they actually learn different moves, meaning they are a completely different form of Pokemon. But after catching the Esper, I found Honedge, which I did catch 3 of them for the full line. After that, I went to Route 8 to use Rock Smash in order to find Binacle. I need 2 of these for the line. And then on the cliffside area where the grass on the same route, we were able to find 2 Inkay for the line. I then completely forgot to do this, but just like X version on Y, if you fish with the good rod on Route 8, you're able to find Scralp, and then if you use the super rod in the same route, you can get Dragalge. I then went to the rocky cliffside route with the Rhyhorn in order to get 2 Helioptiles for the line. And then I went to Route 10 where the giant stones are to find Hawlucha. I then went to Route 11 to find Dedenne, which it's normally a 5%, but I used Static in the front of my party to make it a lot more common. After that, I went to Reflection Cave in order to find myself Carbink. I then went to the route to the east of Snowbell City in order to find 2 Sligoos, 1 for Sliggoo and 1 for Goodra. Then I went to the route north of Lumio City in order to find 3 more Goomies. I need 3, 1 for Goomy and 2 for the Hisuian Sliggoo and Goodra that we will evolve later on. I then went to Frost Cavern in order to to catch 3 Bergmite, we need 2 for the evolution and 1 for Hisuian Avalugg. Then I went to Victory Road and saved in front of one of those shadows of the ceiling Pokemon because you can just save in front of them and then reset until you get Noibat, which is what we needed. We need 2 Noibats for the evolution line. And at this point, we have caught every Pokemon we can in Generation 6, so now it's time to move to Generation 7. There's one Pokemon we need from Generation 7, and that is specifically in the Sun and Moon demo. We need the Ash Greninja, or the Battle Bond Greninja. Now, normally, Pokemon with different abilities, or Pokemon that have essentially a Mega Evolution, don't count as they are not boxable forms for Home, but Battle Bond Greninja is a little different, as Home treats it as a different form entirely. In fact, it's really weird because it actually treats it as a different form only in the mobile version of Home. I think the reason why is because the Switch version of Home doesn't display the abilities of the Pokemon in the Pokedex, so it can't show the different forms of Greninja because the different form of Greninja is strictly an ability change. Now, it's a really weird case, but yes, Home does count it as a different form. The Battle Bond Greninja is different from the other Greninjas you can get that get the different abilities. The same applies to Own Tempo Rockruff. Now, the reason for this is because Battle Bond for Greninja or Own Tempo for Rockruff are abilities that you cannot use ability patches for, ability capsules for, you cannot change, and you cannot revert back. They are essentially just different forms of Pokemon that look no different. Think of it as like the Scatterbugs, but this time Home actually lets you know they're different forms. Now, playing through the Sun and Moon demo was honestly kind of like a fever dream because I've played through Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon so many times, and I even played through the Sun and Moon demo when it first came out, but it had been so long that I didn't remember anything of it, and it just felt so weird playing through this, especially because they have you go on a trial and go to 10 Carat Hill, but the path leading up to 10 Carat Hill is like nothing that exists in Alola. It was so strange. But then when you actually get to 10 Carat Hill and do the trial, you're in the actual 10 Carat Hill that's in the actual games, and it's a weird experience. But after completing the demo, you're able to talk to Professor Kukui and then send your Battle Bond Greninja into Sun or Moon, and then you can pick it up from the delivery man, which is even goofier because it's just a completely different Greninja than what you use on the playthrough of the demo, because mine was a different nature. It reverted its level because mine leveled up during the demo. It's a strange thing, but we got our Battle Bond Greninja for our Living Dex, and at this point we were able to move everything into Pokemon Bank and then send them into Pokemon Home. After getting every Pokemon into Home, we need to catch 2 more Pokemon from Scarlet and Violet. These Pokemon are the Fancy Pattern Scatterbug and Spupa. Like I said before, I have the original event Fancy Pattern Vivillon from Generation 6, but in order to get the Fancy Pattern Scatterbug and Spupa, the first time they were ever made available was in Scarlet and Violet, as Fancy Pattern Vivillon is the native Vivillon for Paldea. After catching both Scatterbug and Spupa, it was time to do some evolutions. First, in Sword and Shield, we evolved our Fletchling into Fletchinder and our Fletchinder into Talonflame. Then I evolved my Pancham by leveling it up to level 32 with a Dark type in my party. In this case, I just put Inkay in my party because I needed to evolve that as well. And then I had to evolve Inkay, which Inkay you need to level up to level 30 while holding your device upside down, which I was having a lot of issues with this. I think part of it was because in my Sword and Shield settings, I did not have gyro controls enabled, and then even when I did enable them, I think there was issues with me having a connected Pro controller along with the system being undocked. I think that was messing with it. So after a few trial and errors, I ended up getting it. As you can see here, I was getting pretty frustrated with it not working, but that's because, as you can see here, Inkay was learning a move and I couldn't tell that it was learning a move, so I just had to cancel the move learning and then it was able to evolve. Next, we evolved our Esper into both forms of Meowstic. Then for the next batch of evolutions, I needed to do some prep. I first needed to teach my Eevee that I got from Generation 1 a Fairy type move, and then I needed to fly to an area that had rainy weather for Sliggoo. But first, I evolved my Honedge into Doublade, and then my Doublade into Aegislash using a Duskstone. I then evolved my Binacle into Barbaracle, my Helioptile into Heliolisk using a Sunstone. And then after mass feeding my Eevee a bunch of vitamins and Eevee reducing berries until it loved me, it evolved into a Sylveon. Then I evolved a Sliggoo into Goodra because I was in an area with rainy weather. And then I evolved Bergmite into Avalugg and Noibat into Noivern. And then I had to do some trade evolutions. So then I went to the BP merchant in Hammerlock in order to get the Sachet and the Whip Dream. I gave the Sachet to Spritzy and the Whip Dream to Swirlix, and then I traded them to evolve them into Aromatisse and Slurpuff. I then had to trade the 4 Pumpkaboos of each size into Gourgeist, so we got the average size, the small size, the large size, and the super size. I then put Zygarde in my party and went to this merchant in Stow-N-Side in order to get the Zygarde Cube. I then used the Zygarde Cube to change one of my Zygardes into the 10% form, while giving both of them the ability Power Construct. Now there's a lot of debate and a lot of confusion as to how many Zygardes you need. Some people believe that you need to have 2 Zygardes, one 10%, one 50% with the ability Aura Break, and then 2 more that are 10% and 50% with Power Construct in order to have every form of Zygarde. But that to me seems completely unnecessary, as the complete form of Zygarde is only used in battle and is not a boxable form in home, and the abilities don't mean it's a different form. It's not like Greninja and Rockruff situation where those are different abilities that you cannot change and that makes them different forms. This is an ability you can change at any time. It would be like needing 2 different Meloettas, one with the move Relic Song and one without the move Relic Song, in order to quote-unquote have both forms of Meloetta. So what I would say is you would only need 2 Zygardes, but if you want the complete form registered in home, you would have to give at least one of your Zygardes the ability Power Construct. In this case, I just gave both of mine the ability Power Construct. Moving on to Scarlet and Violet, I evolved my Chespin into Quilladin, and then a Quilladin into Chestnut. I evolved one of my Fennekins into Braixen, one of my Frokis into Frogadier. I evolved my Littens into the male and female Pyroar. I then evolved all of my Flabébé, so I evolved Flabébé into the red Floette, the yellow Floette, the orange Floette, the blue Floette, and the white Floette. After gathering 5 shiny stones, I used them all on my Floettes, so I got the red Florges, the yellow Florges, the orange Florges, the blue Florges, and the white Florges. I then evolved my Skiddo into Go-Goat. Next, I needed to change one of my Hoopa's forms into the Unbound form, so I went to Porta Marinata, and if you have Hoopa in your party, one of the auctions will give you the prison bottle. I won the auction and got the prison bottle that I could use on my Hoopa. Now this is actually a funny story. As I explained before, I actually got the original events from Generation 6 for 2 Hoopas. And when Pokemon Home came out, I did not know that the Unbound form was a boxable form. I thought it was one of those temporary battle forms, similar to the complete form of Zygarde. So I sent both of my confined Hoopas into Pokemon Home, which they were stuck there until not only Scarlet and Violet got released, but I had to wait until home compatibility with Scarlet and Violet was released in order to get Hoopa into a mainline game on the Switch and then change its form. I even tried to send an Unbound Hoopa that I caught in Pokemon Go into Home just to register the form, but Pokemon Go didn't allow Unbound Hoopa to be sent into Pokemon Home. It had to be the confined form. So yeah, I essentially had to wait 5 years just to change this Hoopa's form into the Unbound form. After that, I loaded up my Legends Arceus save file and went to a place that had a massive mass outbreak because it would be raining there, and I evolved my Goomy into Hisuian Sliggoo and then Hisuian Goodra. And then I evolved my Bergmite into Hisuian Avalugg. And that is all of Generation 6, outside of the different forms of Furfrou, of course. But obviously, I will be changing those Furfrou forms once Legends ZA comes out. Overall, this was one of the quicker generations to get through, as I only needed to play through X and Y once, and not 4 times or 5 times, or however many times I had to play through Gen 3 and 5. So yeah, this generation went a lot faster than most. The hardest part was probably the Vivians, and honestly, it wasn't even catching all the Vivians that took a while. It was evolving every single Scatterbug and Spupa that I got just to make sure that they were all the correct forms, so I could properly mark them and put them in their correct spots in the PC. But again, huge shout out to Echo for helping me get all the Vivian patterns. That was so nice of them. I'm so happy I'm able to complete this. It's so satisfying seeing not only all the Vivians, but Spupas and Scatterbugs all together. Just gotta wait until Legends ZA comes out in order to get all of the different forms of Furfrou, outside of Pokemon Go, of course. Couple things I am curious about Legends ZA, as that is gonna be a Kalos game. I'm very curious if they will finally let us catch the Eternal Flower Floette and maybe re-release Pokeball Vivillon. Now, Eternal Flower Floette I didn't mention in this video because obviously you cannot get it. It's only available in X and Y, but it can't be obtained legitimately, and it also can't be sent into later games because it is a completely illegal Pokemon as of now. And I'm curious based on like what the lore is going to be for Legends ZA, but I wonder if we will be able to get Eternal Flower Floette finally. I'm really hoping that's the case because that would be awesome to get. And again, I wish they re-released some of the old events. I'm sure we'll be able to catch all the mythicals once that game comes out. But the Pokeball Vivillon, I'm curious if we'll be able to just catch that in game or they'll re-release an event for it. But yeah, those are all of my thoughts, and that is my full Generation 6 Living Dex. So let me know what you thought in the comments below. Let me know if you are doing this challenge yourself and how far in you are on the challenge. And until then, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, ring those notification bells, all that good stuff. Be sure to join the domiNATION, and I will see you in the next video.